I must say, this is a question that I have some particular interest in from the Football Stew on X. Is João Felix's move to the Saudi Pro League an admission of failure? Not necessarily by the player, but by clubs who couldn't fit him into their team. I wonder, Lars, if you'd go with that first.
Admission of failure by clubs who couldn't fit him into the team. Listen, it's a sad thing with João Felix because the talent is there. We've seen enough flashes from him in terms of his technical ability, in terms of his flair, in terms of his capability of doing incredible things. And from that perspective, it's sad to see a 25-year-old essentially retire from serious club football and go to Saudi Arabia. But he has had many chances. This is a guy who's been at Benfica, Atletico Madrid, Chelsea, Barcelona, and AC Milan. And he's gotten game time wherever he's gone. Like, at some point, you have to just go, no. You're not, like, what you're actually producing on the field is not commensurate with the financial package that's required for securing your services. Now, he would have had plenty of options. There's no shortage of clubs around Europe on the slightly lower tier who would have been willing to try to adjust their team for a guy of his talent. Maybe not Barcelona, maybe not Real Madrid, maybe not Bayern, maybe not that level, but slightly lower below, because the talent is enticing. But the fact that he's decided to go to Saudi Arabia instead of trying one of those things, that tells you all about his priorities. And I don't like sitting here and getting on my high horse about people pursuing money. Most of us do our job for money in some way. Like, that's fine. And I don't like telling people to nothing's easier than turning down money on other people's behalf, right? So you have an offer of what is, he's already a phenomenally wealthy man, but I'm sure this Saudi thing will make him even more wealthy, and good luck to him. But it isn't an admission of defeat by anyone other than him, I guess, in the sense that he's realized, I'm just going to cash in. That's fine. That'll do me. I've tried it at the top end of European football. I couldn't do it. I'll go and make money. That's a decision that's, that I'm not in a position to say whether that's the right thing for him or his family, but that's where we're at.
Although, JJ, the question is interesting because Lars is very welcome to have his own opinion. It's all down to the player. But the question suggests that there is some part to be played if he has failed, then, if we describe it as a failure, by the clubs. Because all those clubs that Lars mentioned, whether it be Benfica, Chelsea, AC Milan, they found it difficult to get the best out of him. And, do they not have to take some part of this as a failure from their part?
I mean, I think there's definitely, a case to sort of consider whether some clubs maybe have to bear a bit of a brunt of responsibility more than others. I certainly think that Atleti are probably one of the more prominent clubs when considering, if there are any clubs who are sort of, I'm not going to say guilty, but sort of, responsible for the continued difficulties in sort of cracking the João Felix enigma, because I think that there was a time where they probably could have allowed him to make moves that would have been more conducive to him actually rediscovering himself on the pitch, whereas they were looking to sort of extract the best kind of financial package possible, unrealistically so, based on what we'd seen on the pitch. So I think maybe their lack of judgment in terms of, I guess, how João Felix's reputation was further deteriorated by some of those loan spells, and the fact that other loan spells were dictated essentially by the amount of money that Atleti were able to recoup, when agreeing to make that transfer. And I do think it became obvious that it was a bad fit, reasonably early on, especially relative to the amount of money spent. But I think there have been other opportunities along the way that could have really suited João Felix in terms of, sort of reinvigorating him as a player. I mean, I personally, when Villa were linked with him, I would have loved for Unai Emery to sort of get his hands on him, because I'm really confident that Emery could have, done something really exciting with him. But I think, unfortunately, given sort of the way that, João Felix burst onto the scene and the ridiculously high, price that was kind of put on his head out of his control, ultimately sensible decisions weren't taken afterwards, which shaped his career and has ultimately left him in this situation in his mid-20s.
Yeah, 43.7 million is the deal that Chelsea have demanded from Al Nassr, and only 25 years old. Honestly, he could have been a contender, as Marlon Brando would have said, if this was the waterfront, and the contender to being one of Europe's best players, I think.
Yeah, JJ speaks very well and very sensibly, and that was perhaps some much needed nuance to my rather more critical stance on it. But I would argue, even though some of this was out of his control because of the monetary worth that was put on his head and all this, if he this summer had gone, I am desperate to make this work, I really want to show what I can do, I am prepared to take a huge weight cut if the right team out there can find the transfer fee that's needed to release me, I kind of think a club would have made that work, as much as we discussed in the main show yesterday that money's a little tight around Europe right now. But if he was prepared to drop his salary demands, that transfer fee that you would have needed to get him out of Chelsea, I feel like someone would have probably found. But instead, yeah, he's going to Saudi for a sum of money I think Chelsea will be very happy to be receiving for him. I don't think anyone else are paying that for him. I do admire the Saudi Arabian club's just total commitment to being the dumbest money in any given room. I mean, they're very consistent on this. But yeah, there he goes. It's a solution that works for Chelsea. It's a solution that works for João Felix's bank account and his family and their families, I'm sure. But from a football's perspective, it is very sad.
Yeah, and from his old club's perspective as well, Benfica, who showed interest in, getting him to sign for them. Again, the perhaps sad conclusion to João Felix's top flight career, but yeah, we'll wait and see. You never know. This question from Vincent. Is it Vincent? Possibly, if he's French, or Vincent on Instagram.
How can we convince you to do the entire rest of the show in a French accent, Dotun? I think this is how it should.
You can't. I'll do it in a Norwegian accent. I'm up for that anytime.
Okay.
Yeah, well, and it's a pretty good Norwegian accent with a bit of Swedish in it, as you know. Anyway, yesterday on OTC, we were talking about the future for the French Ligue 1. Vincent on Instagram is asking, how are Paris FC, JJ, preparing for the new season? Could they surprise Ligue 1, or will they remain in PSG's shadow?
Yeah, this one's absolutely fascinating. I'm really, really keen to see what the rest of the summer transfer window holds in store for Paris FC. And just, by the way, I'm going to keep it French. It's definitely a Vincent, I feel, who's posing this question. But no, their transfer dealings so far have been really, really interesting. I think, spending big on Otavio from Porto, that's, a standout piece of business. But actually their first move of the entire summer transfer window was to go and pick up Moses Simon. So, fans will remember him from many different stints with a number of clubs across Europe, picking him up from Nantes, where he's, he played a key role in sort of keeping their head above water in Ligue 1 the last couple of years. And it's the beginning of what's hoped to be a very ambitious new era for Paris FC, as they try to, as you alluded to in the question, sort of step out of the shadow of PSG in Paris and really sort of give France's capital, sort of a true rivalry and a true derby that can hopefully stand the test of time. The situation that they're in at the moment is, I'm not going to say it's unprecedented, but there's not many clubs, in France at the moment getting new ownership with as much, wealth behind them as the Arnaud family and LVMH, with a little bit of help from Red Bull, obviously. And I think that this is going to be really exciting for French football because it gives us, a second club in the capital, but also gives us a new, sort of identity of club as well, because the Paris FC project, at least based on sort of the first few months of new ownership and sort of what's been spoken about in terms of the hopes for the project, is going to be something that's radically different from the early approach that PSG took in terms of setting themselves up, going out and spending these big amounts of money. Sure, relative to the situation in French football at the moment, spending big on Otavio, that does qualify as spending a lot of money right now, but it's not on the same sort of level as PSG going out and spending the best part of 50 million euros on Javier Pastore as they did, way back in 2011. So, I think Paris FC, the moves that they're making at the moment, it's a mixture of sort of going for Ligue 1 experience with the likes of Simon, but also the likes of De Smet as well, sort of raiding, the relegated clubs like Reims. I think that's smart business. But then also sort of pushing the boat out for a very talented younger player in Otavio. I think people forget as well that they've actually got quite a talented squad already, the one that managed to get them up from Ligue 2. You look at some of the players in that squad, you've got the likes of, Crasso, Maxime Lopez as well in midfield, some very, very exciting talents. And they are a team, I think, that many people are expecting to, not going to say fly under the radar, because it's impossible for them to do so, based on the fact that they've been taken over and so much is expected from sort of their evolution in the top flight. But I think many people are expecting them to be a lot more competitive than and in a short space of time than you would expect from your regular sort of promoted club coming up from the second tier, especially one that hasn't been, sort of anywhere near the top flight for a long, long time now.
Well, staying with the French leagues, Lars, this question from Kent on email, again, refers to the summer transfer window. What does the future hold for Randal Kolo Muani? PSG have reportedly rejected a bid from Juventus following his loan there, but it looks like Manchester United and Chelsea have joined the race. What's the most likely outcome?
He's a curious player, Kolo Muani, because he clearly has talent. He's got like a combination of, he's got he's got pretty good physique. He's quite fast. He's also quite big. He's just not for the price bracket you're looking at, because PSG paid quite a lot of money for him from Eintracht Frankfurt. He doesn't score a lot of goals for a forward now. I mean, his output is a little suspect for a guy who's in the sort of top tier top bracket transfer fee wise. If you look at his sort of more underlying numbers, the stuff that stands out is that he carries the ball really well and can go past people, which is useful to a lot of teams. But it's not. I mean, again, for the kind of price that PSG are looking for, there aren't a ton of clubs, I think, who are willing to throw themselves in for a striker whose goal-scoring record is a little suspect. But the fact that Juventus had him in the building and are now quite keen on bringing him back and are willing to spend quite a bit of money to do so, I mean, I guess that tells you something, because they've done the try before you buy thing, and they do want to buy. So I kind of think that's probably the deal that's there to be made, like if they can get there on the price. I don't know what you think, JJ?
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be a good thing for the player, and clearly the club are happy enough. And, I do think we forget as well just how productive the very first few games were for Kolo Muani when he joined Juve on loan, because I remember sort of him going from scraping minutes at PSG, really. In fact, I think over the first half of the season, I remember writing about this, he played more minutes for France and scored more goals on international duty than he did, in club football. So I do think that there's a lot of logic to it there. The thing that had always surprised me, in fact, was that Juve have kind of been looking for a way to move Vlahovic on for a while now, and sort of Lars touched upon it there. Kolo Muani is not naturally a prolific goal scorer. He's almost like an ideal foil for a more predatory goal scorer, and it's always surprised me that Kolo Muani hasn't kind of helped Juve to unlock Vlahovic's sort of prolific potential on a more consistent basis, because to me it feels like that's the kind of match in attack that would work and possibly provide a two-pronged solution, not only in bringing in the sort of goal threat that Kolo Muani can bring occasionally, but the goal threat that's been lacking for a while from Vlahovic, at least on a consistent basis. So to me, I think the logic is sound that Juve would look to bring him back, and there's definitely a deal to be done there, because there's no future for Kolo Muani at PSG, certainly not while Luis Enrique is coach. But to me, the only sort of question that I have in terms of Juve's logic in doing that deal is why they haven't looked to use the kind of fruitful, form that they've managed to extract from Kolo Muani to try and rejuvenate Vlahovic a little bit as well.
Well, let's go full Norwegian with the next question,
Yes.
Lars. Yeah, Norwegian would. From Adam on email, Bodø, that was a good joke, by the way, but never mind. From Adam on email, Bodø Glimt.
So it's a good sign when you have to say that, but sure, let's go on.
Bodø Glimt, which always brings a smile to people's faces when we mention that team. Bodø Glimt are relatively consistent both in the league and in Europe. How do they manage to retain their key players? Is this a lesson that other teams should be learning?
So, yeah, I understand why they asked that question, because what often happens with these clubs from the sort of leagues that are more on the fringes of European football is if they do anything at all in Europe, all their players suddenly leave, and that's just kind of the finances of modern football. Back in the day when Rosenborg were doing well in the Champions League, they could go abroad and they might increase their salary by 3 or 4-fold. But some of them choose to stay because they were having a nice time in Norway. Thing is, now when you go abroad, you can increase your salary by 10-fold and 20-fold, and then it becomes a completely different equation. So most players do end up leaving. And some have left Bodø Glimt. But the thing that really strikes me as quite interesting is that Bodø Glimt have a bunch of players who have gone abroad and who have then come back. Most notably, their sort of midfield general, Patrick Berg, who had a move to Lens in Liga, which didn't pan out for him. And he's come back. Håkon Evjen has played in the demise. He's come back. Nikita Heikin, the goalkeeper, left the club, wanted to try something else, ended up deciding to come back. Jens Petter Hauge went to Milan, had a loan spell in Frankfurt, has come back. Bjørkan, the left back, went to Hertha Berlin, didn't have a good time, came back. So it's interesting to me, not just that they hold on to players, but how many have actually gone abroad, tried in the bigger pools, better money, and had decided, actually, I was kind of better off playing for Bodø Glimt. And I think it really speaks to the environment they have at that club, at the community they've created. I think they have a really good time there, and now after their European successes, they are ever able to offer some contracts that, at least by Scandinavian standards, are pretty juicy. So it's not like they're poor, the guys who go up there. But it is something that I think, as much as I love the Bodø Glimt story and I admired what they do, I do think this procession of players who get sold abroad and who end up going back is something that's going to be a little bit of a, maybe not a red flag, but an orange flag for scouts from other leagues who are now looking at these guys, who think maybe there's just something in the water there, and something to do with the coaching staff and the community that they have. That means that these guys do kind of struggle to replicate those performances at other clubs in bigger leagues.
Yeah, I'm glad that you touched on that, Lars, because I actually wanted to sort of flip it back to you, I guess, with another question, because I do think that when a lot of those players left, certainly sort of the core of that successful team, you mentioned Berg, for example, but also Haug. I think they left at a time when the team hadn't sort of established itself as sort of potentially contenders, I guess we could say now, for sort of the lower tier of UEFA competitions like the Europa League, the Conference League. And, does that sort of added, competitiveness, obviously you mentioned sort of the finances that come with it, but does that make them sort of almost feeling that maybe it wasn't the best decision to go and make the move, because if they'd stayed there, maybe the team could have become more competitive a lot sooner and have maybe lost out on a small part of their career?
Yeah, that's a fair point to make. And the thing I think about a lot when I look at this, they have quite a unique environment at that club. And I'm sure you've all read some of the long reads about how are they doing this. And it's all about like being quite sort of touchy-feely, new agey. They do quite a lot of meditation. They have this sort of, they don't have a captain, they have a revolving captaincy group, and it's a club, because it's a club that's never had money before. It's a club that's always like been a smaller club who's had to make do with the players they can attract. They have a very strong culture of just kind of trying to look after everyone and not not like write off players immediately if they're struggling, and everyone should be seen as a human being and as an individual. It's an extremely supportive club for the players who are there, I would say. And I do wonder if some of those players, when they go abroad to bigger leagues, bigger clubs, where the environment is maybe a little bit more cutthroat and the club has not quite the same amount of personal investment in your success, maybe that transition becomes a little harsh for them. Because I thought, I mean, I don't know how much you remember from this, but Berg leaving Lens that soon. I mean, he was only there for half a season before deciding this isn't for me and going back. Maybe he's a special case. He's actually a third generation Bodø Glimt player. Both his father and grandfather played for Bodø Glimt, so clearly he's very close to that club. And he just went abroad and found immediately this isn't for me, and then just left straight away. I do wonder if the gap in how you're treated as a human being and what your life is like when you play for Bodø Glimt versus when you're playing the bigger European league, it's a big change.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that sort of family aspect for Berg as well, because from what I heard from sort of people in and around Lens, like the big difficulty for him during his fleeting spell in northern France was that culturally the shock was enormous. And to be honest, moving from anywhere in France to Lens would already be a big enough cultural shock, I think, for anyone. So moving from Scandinavia, especially where you're like you said, you're kind of revered just because you're part of that family generation after generation that's played for the club, and you're sort of the latest kind of torchbearer for the family name. But it certainly sounds like it was very, very difficult sort of away from the pitch for sort of him and his family to really sort of put down roots and even make a go of it, which is a shame, because I actually thought that it looked like a good fit on paper and it was an exciting signing. But yeah, we never really sort of got to see the real Berg. So I'm glad that he's sort of rediscovered himself by moving back home. And it certainly seems now that is going to be where he plays out the majority of his career, at least at this moment in time.
Well, he was actually heavily linked with the move to MLS this summer. I believe the Chicago Fire were very hot for Berg, as it were, but I don't think they got there on the transfer fee, or certainly haven't just yet. But it is a broader, to try to make this less Norwegian specific, I think there is perhaps a lesson here in that with football clubs, we do forget that they are teams, and now that we have stats for everything and all the players, and you can do this and you can do that, they are always part of a collective, and not just part of that collective of 11 players, but also part of a community. And you can definitely have players who just are very happy where they are and produce very good stuff where they are, who will not necessarily produce the same thing if you kind of lift them up with a helicopter and just drop them down into a completely different context.
Talking of which, a club in France, JJ, and please don't groan when you hear Carl on Instagram's question, because you did a good job of, taking us through the le, and the les debacles of the French Ligue 1. But Carl on Instagram wants to know about one particular team. After their horror display in the Europa League last season, are Nice really ready for Champions League qualification if they get past Benfica?
Yeah, so this one I really don't have a particularly strong answer for right now, because it's impossible to tell sort of what to expect from Nice. They performed really well in the league last season, and as you would expect under Francaise, who was the mastermind of Lens, sort of coming up from Ligue 2 and really establishing themselves to the point where they managed to get into the Champions League for one season as well. But this Nice side, they've got a lot of talented players. They've been moving on a fair few players as well. There's some of the likes of Bulka, he's already left. Laborde as well, who I really rate as a very consistent and regular goal scorer in Ligue 1. He's moved on, and there's a few other players who are expected to go as well over the course of the summer. So it's left a very interesting looking sort of scenario for Ez and the players to try to get through, and going up against a team like Benfica with the experience that they have year on year in European competition. I have to say I don't necessarily fancy Nice's chances, and my basis for that is last season was disgraceful in Europe. Like, you look at the performance, in the Europa League. Looking back on the table, having played 8 games, they got 3 points. Those 3 points didn't come with a victory. There were 3 draws. They finished 35th out of 36 teams, with only Karabag finishing below them. I'm sorry, based on the squad that was assembled, Nice should have done a lot better, should have been a lot more competitive, and really let the side down for Ligue 1 in Europe, because with a better performance, I think the gap between Ligue 1 and the Eredivisie and the Portuguese Primeira Liga would be even bigger. And Nice, obviously, it's well known that they're Ineos owned for the moment, although Ineos are looking to sort of move on from that investment. Ratcliffe's come out and very publicly said he doesn't enjoy watching Nice games, yet is quite happy to ask for silly amounts of money in exchange for the club. But, the ingredients are there to be successful, and it feels like Nice very deliberately last season chose to be successful domestically as opposed to competing in Europe. And I'm interested to know what decision they make this season, because I almost feel like at this moment in time, especially given how last season went, it would almost be better to see Nice have a crack at the Europa League, but to really put in a proper attempt this time around, as opposed to potentially making their way past Benfica, because ultimately you never really know what happens, in these kind of qualifiers, especially this early in the season when players are not quite at, the peak of match fitness. I almost feel like it could be setting Nice up for a very, very challenging season, albeit one that would be quite lucrative if they were to make it through past Benfica. I almost feel like it would be better for Nice and ultimately for French football if they were to take the Europa League really seriously this season, if they ultimately drop out against Benfica.
Can I just ask JJ, has there been any fallout in France, A, from the fact that Ineos have so very clearly lost interest in Nice, and B, the actual owner of the club saying straight up that he doesn't want to watch them because the football is so bad, which is pretty remarkable behavior. Obviously disrespectful to say the least, preposterous stuff. Like, has anyone picked up on that?
Yeah, they have, and I think many people feel sort of really let down, not least the departing president, River, who's now been replaced at the helm of the club. I think he basically had to walk back all of sort of Ineos's ambitions and sort of vision for the future that they talked about a couple of years ago, because very clearly, with those kind of comments, it was obvious that there was no real plan, for Nice, certainly not in terms of, sort of the way that Ineos viewed the club. And I think what was most disrespectful, even more so perhaps than what Ratcliffe actually came out and said, which in itself was just extremely damning, was the fact that the investment into Manchester United wasn't even his first flirtation with, investing in a club in England. There were the links with Chelsea, and also I think there was some tentative suggestion that he was looking at Tottenham for a while before ultimately coming back to Manchester United, which, as we all know, he's said quite publicly was his childhood club. But I think you look at some of the names that were attached to the project at the very beginning, Jean-Claude Blanc, for example, that was a real coup to pick him up from PSG, Obviously, he had a short-lived spell with Manchester United, and I think he's at this moment in time in more of an advisory role now with Ineos. But it feels like ultimately Ineos knew that their investment in Nice, for whatever reason, wasn't sort of satisfying them, and ultimately the decision to potentially put the club on the market could have been taken a lot sooner than it actually was. And now I think what many people fear and what many people see when talking about the topic of Nice is that ultimately whatever happens next in terms of the club's ownership, it's going to benefit Ineos's ability to potentially finance what's been going on at Manchester United since they arrived, which is just a continuation at this moment in time of the struggles of the best part of the last decade, really. So I think that there is a real feeling of sort of having been insulted a little bit, really, by sort of Ineos's behaviour throughout the entirety of their ownership of Nice.
Yeah, thank you both for answering all of our Ask OTC questions this week so eloquently. It's time for our Game of the Week! And each week our experts recommend a game for you to watch at the weekend, and just as importantly, they also suggest the food we should be having with it. So, Lars, let's go lutefisk then. What are you going for in terms of the football this week? Yeah,
this is slightly rogue behavior by me, but it's been known to happen. There isn't a ton on my radar for this weekend, so I'm going to skip ahead to Tuesday next week because we do have the Champions League qualifiers, and it's every year. It's so phenomenally brutal that we get them this early in the season because they are season-defining games for some of these teams. There's a huge Nordic thing to this. I bring the Nordic bias as always. We have Malmö versus FC Copenhagen. Now, the thing I just said actually kind of doesn't apply to Malmö because they've been playing for a while. They're 18 games into the season. And Malmö are actually not top of the league. They're 10 points behind Mjällby, which is a little bit of a shock. And I believe they play each other next weekend. So that could be one for Game of the Week next week if someone wants to go really deep into the Swedish situation. But for now, Malmö are facing FC Copenhagen, who Andy picked last week as his team of this Game of the Week. They have, of course, sold Victor Froholt for 22 million euro, I think it is, to Porto. So that's a really big deal. But excitingly, as I mentioned yesterday, they brought in Yusufa Moukoko, which is quite the thing, and they still have a pretty strong side. The reason there is extra spice to this isn't just because, they're essentially local rivals, aren't they? They're just across the bridge. They're right next to each other. But I would also say, I think most people would feel FC Copenhagen is the biggest team in Scandinavia in terms of their financial muscle, in terms of their cachet. And if you're looking at who the second strongest team in Scandinavia is, there's a few contenders to that, but I definitely think Malmö they've won a number of titles in the Swedish league recently. They really want to make themselves sort of the Swedish FC Copenhagen, really, in terms of their the money they have and the power they have. So it's a good, definitely two of the biggest Scandinavian teams facing off. And if you want more from this game, I often have to flag up the coach of Malmö, Henrik Rydström, is a darling of the tactical bloggers out there because he's one of those guys he's kind of forsaking the sacred sort of Pep Guardiola school of positionism of how the players should all be in the right structure and this and that. He's much more vibes inspired very much by the Brazilian coach Fernando Diniz, who I'm sure Dotun have had many conversations with Tim Vickery about, this sort of much more free tactic of not necessarily sticking to your positions but creating overloads, not necessarily having a structure to make the field bigger when you have the ball, but actually making smaller areas of the field where you have a lot of players so that the man on the ball has a lot of passing options. And it looks very different when it works to other types of football. It's more chaotic, more fluid, interesting to watch. So I just think if you're a bit of a football nerd, even if you don't care about Scandinavian bragging rights, do you think this is a game that's worth watching?
I'm starving, though. I'm absolutely starving. You've set it up, but I can't wait to see the match now. But what am I going to eat with it?
Eat with it? Andy, it's such a cliche in Scandinavia, but the Danish hot dogs is a big thing. And Andy went there last time. So I don't think, what else can I think? What's the Danish dish? What they really do? They eat quite a lot of turbot, and I haven't eaten a good turbot in ages. Not normal football snackage for sure. More of a big cooking operations. But this is a Nordic feast. Find yourself a turbot if you can.
And it's interesting to hear a Norwegian saying let's go Danish in terms of cuisine when I would have gone for fårikål.
Yeah, fårikål is more of a Christmas thing, but definitely fårikål is fantastic.
Let's just have some
autumn thing anyway, because it's a sheep thing. Autumn, maybe a pinna shirt this Christmas.
Oh, you do love your shirt, don't you? You've got shirt kaka, of course, but then they do have that all over Scandinavia as well. Do you make yours any different from the Swedish meatballs?
There'll be slight variations. I think the Norwegian meatballs tend to be a little bit bigger. Like the Swedish are kind of small, round IKEA ones. The Norwegian ones are a little bit bigger, I would say. But I have lamb on the mind, but that's more where I'm from. And let's move swiftly on. Have some turbot with your Scandinavian derby.
No, we can. If you've got lamb on your mind, we can go for the pinna shirt.
We could go, but that's not a Malmö or a Copenhagen thing at all. That'd be like if we have a Norwegian game, we can go for the stick meat, which is very nice.
And we can have some lefse with it. Lefse with some brunost.
Again, very Norwegian, Dotun.
I did my research on all the food that you could possibly eat.
I noticed.
I think you know. Anyway, that side says...
Tell you what, I went to Azerbaijan at the weekend. They do really good lamb as well. Very different vibe than the Norwegian lamb, but also good lamb.
And probably you can watch Malmö FF versus FC Copenhagen on Tuesday at 8 p.m. in Azerbaijan as well, but no need to go all that way. So, JJ, you've got a lot of cuisine to follow. And, well, the French can do it. I have every hope in you offering us something nice to eat, but you haven't gone French in terms of your game of the week.
No, I haven't. I've actually gone to Germany into the second tier because I'm fascinated. I mean, to be honest, the German second tier now for years has been wonderful to watch sort of year after year because there's so many big names sort of down there. And I think, having a game of this stature this early on in the season, is definitely something that jumped out to me when considering game of the week. So I've gone for Schalke versus Hertha Berlin in the Bundesliga 2. And I think that this one is going to be a really fascinating season to see which club tries to sort of follow the Hamburg blueprint of finally trying to get themselves out of the second tier, because it feels like the stakes are probably higher than they've ever been now for Schalke, because I don't think they didn't bank on being out of the top tier for as long as they have been. But obviously Hertha as well are certainly sort of top tier regulars and won't want to sort of hang around too long. So I would put these two down as perhaps two of my pre-season favourites to sort of see vying for potential promotion. But it's been a brutal last couple of years, certainly for Schalke. So I think the fans are going to want to sort of be in fine voice very early in the season to make sure that the players get off to a strong start and build up as much momentum as quickly as possible. Now, although I wouldn't be recommending the sites around Gelsenkirchen, I have had some fantastic currywurst when I've been in sort of that part of Germany. So I think that would certainly be the sort of obvious choice for me in terms of the what we'd be eating while watching the game.
Yeah, I suppose you've got to if you're in Germany. That Schalke versus Hertha Berlin game, though, is on tonight at 7:30.